Shalom, welcome. I'd like to continue the teaching that we started in our newsletter about the fall cycle and the concept of letting go. It's obvious to us when we go into fall and autumn. It's a beautiful time of year. We see the leaves changing and we go about our business of pumpkin picking and so forth with our family. It's one of my favorite times of year. And it's obvious to us that there's a change happening. And we can see that as the leaves are changing and they change and they eventually, the tree lets them go and they fall off. This is the same thing that we can be connected to within ourselves and in our lives. And I began to talk about it a little bit in the newsletter, in that the fall cycle, if you think of the cycles of the year as a circle, is exactly opposite of the spring cycle. So the fall cycle is Tishri in the Hebrew calendar, and it's about letting go. And it's about transformation. And that transformation then, during the next 6 months, leads us in once again to the spring cycle, which is Nisan, which is about rebirth. So we have these constant circles, wheels, the wheels of life, galgalim, we call them in Hebrew. So as we have rebirth in the spring, we begin transforming from that rebirth in the fall. That leads us to another rebirth and a higher state of consciousness. So it's critical that as we enter the fall season, that we think more deeply about the notion of letting go and transformation. And I wanted to bring up a story from the Torah in Genesis, Bereshit 22. There's a story in the Torah about letting go, but it's often misunderstood to be a story about human sacrifice or God testing Abraham's loyalty to him. And I'm here to say that those things are very misunderstood. What this is really about is it's a test, but it's a test like other tests that allow us an opportunity to enter into a higher consciousness. It's not a test about loyalty where some king-like God is sitting on a throne and demanding loyalty from someone and then punishing them if they don't have the loyalty that he expects. This is an old paradigm, and for all of us meditators, we can throw that paradigm away. This is about opportunity for a higher consciousness, opportunity about that allows us to have transformation. But what I'm saying is critical is that we have our intention to let go, just like we do in our mindlessness meditation. We gently and easily begin to think our letter, and then we just let go. And whatever happens, happens. We have thoughts, they come and they go, and we don't bind these thoughts. We don't concentrate on these thoughts. We don't keep the thoughts. We let them go as if we were letting a balloon go out the window. So if we want to look at Bereshit 22 as a story of ultimate letting go and ultimate freedom, let's look a little bit more deeply at a couple of words and some letters. And I'm going to talk a little bit about something called gematria. Gematria is simply, in Jewish mysticism, a way of looking at the Hebrew letters. Each Hebrew letter has a numerical value. And when we make a word or a name, those add up to another numerical value. And when we explore the numerical value of letters or names or words, we look at other letters or names or words that have the same numerical value and explore their connection. So this story of Abraham being asked to sacrifice his son in Bereshit 22 is normally called the Akedah, or binding, the binding. But if you go and look at the Torah itself and you look at the word that's used, it's vayachod. Vayachod is enhi bound. and it has a numerical value of 190. Also, lechalel, to curse, has a numerical value of 190. Now, I'm suggesting that these words are connected. Binding, either within yourself or binding someone else, is to curse, lechalel. So if we look at lechalel more closely, and vayachod more closely, they both contain the letter kuf. Kuf has to do with many things, but one is illusion. And in lechalel, the lamed is a connecting letter. So it's connecting to an illusionary state of consciousness. So whenever we gain a higher state of consciousness, we have to let go of illusions and delusions that keep us in a lower state of consciousness, right? To experience higher consciousness, we let go of the illusions and we gain a higher truth. So, to bind, which also has the letter kuf, ve'achod, and is also 190, and lechalel is 190, to curse, when we allow ourselves to be bound up by something, some concept, some thought, some person, we are actually cursing ourselves. When we bind another, we are cursing them. Why? Not in some way like, oh, we curse you to be in pain or to suffer like that. No, it's rather a curse because it does not allow pure consciousness and higher consciousness to flow freely just by the words of being bound. And if we look more deeply at ourselves and our lives, we'll find there's a lot of binding that we do. So much binding, it's amazing that we can even go to the bathroom. When you think about it, we bind ourselves to thoughts about religion, thoughts about sports, thoughts about politics, thoughts about loved ones. And all of these bindings keep us in jail, keep pure consciousness frozen, judgments, rigidities. So here we go back to the story of Abraham. And the story itself is amazing. I mean, when you think about it, this is Abraham who bargained with God to not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because Sodom and Gomorrah was getting ready to be destroyed as a result of its citizens being murdering rapists, horrible people. But yet Abraham bargained for them. So then further on in these stories in the Torah, God in Bereshit 22 asks Abraham to sacrifice his son. Silently, Abraham says nothing, he does nothing, he just proceeds to carry out this task. I am saying that Abraham never once thought that God wanted him to literally sacrifice his son. He understood immediately that this was not a test of his loyalty to God, but rather a test of him being willing to let go, to be unbound, and to allow his son Isaac to be unbound, to break the shackles that his human consciousness had created with his son. The first time the Torah uses the word ahava, which is love, is describing Abraham's love for Isaac. So his love was overwhelming. So at this point, the divine natural law recognizes that there's some binding going on with this love. So we need to let go of those shackles. We need to unbound Isaac and allow him to be free. So the story even tells us that Abraham says to Isaac, God will provide the sacrifice. And then Abraham sees a ram in the thicket. And when he sees that ram in the thicket, it means more than it does just on face value, because the ram is a symbol of the constellation of Aries that is the symbol of rebirth in Nisan, in the spring. So this cycle is complete in this story of Abraham letting go of the binding of Isaac that was in his heart and allowing him to be free, to be born anew like the spring cycle. This is what this story is about. It's about letting go. It's not about testing of loyalty. It's about releasing of psychological, emotional, and spiritual things that bind us. This is what we experience in our meditation because we're in a complete state of surrender. Our intention is to experience this freedom that comes from completely letting go. And as Abraham lets go of Isaac, Isaac is free to become the fulfillment of his soul, of his destiny, and not the destiny of his father. There's a beautiful story, a poem actually written by a Sufi poet, which is in the same Semitic tradition that we, of our Semitic tradition, that I'd like to read to you. Khalil Gibran is the poet, and this section is on children. And I think it speaks to this quite well. Your children are not your children, they are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves also the bow that is stable. So, to be clear, this is not about indifference towards our loved ones or towards those things in life that we do. No, the opposite. It's about loving them sincerely and without the illusion that we can create them into ourselves or bind them to us. It's love in its most sincere way that allows consciousness to flow freely and allows consciousness of the loved and the beloved to flow freely. It's almost the opposite of hyper loyalty. So if you think about it, if you are loyal to a king or a president or a pope or a rabbi, that's okay, that can be a good thing. But how does that turn bad? When we keep it bound. When we're bound to that loyalty regardless of what shows up. So that king or that pope or that president somehow starts doing bad things. You wake up one morning and he starts killing people, killing his own citizens. Well, if you're bound to loyalty to him, that's a curse. Because then you begin to make excuses for him rather than saying, oh, this pope or this king or this ruler, he's turned bad, and that loyalty I have to him now is no longer existing. So when we are not bound and cursed by the binding of this type of loyalty or this illusion that we can bind someone or something to us, because in the relative sphere of existence, everything is temporal. Suddenly there's a freedom. Suddenly there's an experience. That love flows freely. You don't have less love for your son, in this case of Abraham and Isaac. No, you have more love. It flows more freely. It's more bliss, because it's not cursed by being bound. So, this relates completely to our mindlessness meditation practice, where our intention is to completely surrender. We experience that in our mindlessness meditation. We bring it out into our lives. We don't have intention to bind people or to keep bound up within ourselves negative or positive things. We don't want to bind up within ourselves judgment and rigidity. We want to let that go. Let it flow down to the curb and into the sewer, and let it be transformed into positive energy somehow. And the positive things we don't want to be bound to either. The love, we're not binding love. We have love and we let it flow. It doesn't stay within us. It flows out to our family and friends and neighbors and out into the universe. It comes back to us in a circle, like a cycle, like a wheel, like breathing in and out. That love grows as it's allowed to be free, and we don't hold on to it. So we experience that freedom in our meditation, and we experience that freedom in our life simply with the intention. So this is the mantra of the teaching. This is what matters. To let go and to not bind. We don't want to bind up within ourselves anything, positive or negative, or bind anyone else. We let go. We experience that love. We have no illusions about permanency. We just experience it by letting go. So I hope this is helpful to you. Keep meditating every day. Surrender and let go. Take it as it comes. Shalom.